Kia ora, good afternoon, good evening, good morning to our global community tuning in around the world. Thanks for joining us for our Kia Returner webinar today, which we are aiming to give you some practical advice for returning to New Zealand from being overseas. My name's Des Martin. I'm part of the team at Kia. Thank you for joining us today. And I've got three panelists joining us who are from Goodwins Real Estate, Crowne Relocations, and a recently returned member of our Kia community. Just a few housekeeping notes before we start. This webinar is being recorded. We will share it on our website and we'll email it out to you all as well. It'll go across our social channels. So if you do miss anything during the course of the night, or you want to tune in at any time again to come back, that will be made available to you online. And we will have plenty of time for questions and answers at the end of the session today. So as they pop up in your mind, do pop them into the question answer function on Zoom and we will address them at the end of the session. Don't be shy. The panelists are happy to address those questions as we get to the end. So just a bit of a background about Kia, for those of you who do not know. We are a not-for-profit organisation. We were founded more than 20 years ago to connect Kiwi all around the globe. Today, our Kia community consists of 500,000 members living in around 185 countries. Kia works to connect our global Kiwi community to each other and to New Zealand. We support Kiwi export businesses looking to grow globally by connecting them with our community to offer in-market advice and experience. And we work to support our returning Kiwi community who are looking to bring their global learnings and expertise back to Aotearoa, which brings us to this webinar today, where we hope to answer some key questions about that process of returning to New Zealand after a period of being overseas. Joining us on the webinar today, as I said, we have three panelists. First is Brendan Goodwin from Goodwins Real Estate. Brendan has a background in commercial property law in New Zealand, Australia, and the UK. So he also has first-hand experience moving back to New Zealand after being overseas. Now that he's back in New Zealand, he's joined his family business. They are a full-service real estate agency across both property management and sales. Also joining us is Kerry Janes from Crowne Relocations. Kerry runs Crowne's World Mobility New Zealand supply chain management team and oversees the relocation, immigration and settling in services in New Zealand. She has been with Crowne since 2002, which means she has over 20 years experience helping people move to New Zealand from overseas. And last we have Hilary Kaye-Cormack. Hilary and her family have returned to New Zealand twice now. First from Shanghai and then from Sweden. So she has plenty of first-hand experience in both the practicalities of packing up and moving, but also the personal realities of settling back into life in New Zealand. Thank you all for joining us here today. Do you want to all say hello, panelists? I know sitting there waiting patiently for me to do my intro.
Hi,
Give
everyone.
us all a wave.
Hello.
Kia ora.
All right. Well, let's not muck around. We'll jump straight into our first questions. And my first question is for you, Hilary. Could you just give us a really quick rundown of your overseas experience, where you were and that moving process?
Yeah, sure. Kia ora again, everybody. Yep, back in 2010, we were based in Auckland and my husband was offered a role up in Shanghai. So we were relocated up there with our young family. All expenses were paid by the company. So it was a pretty seamless experience. We decided to kind of take everything with us. We were up there for 8 years. Absolutely loved it, but decided it was time to come home because our daughter was due to start university and we really wanted her to go to university here in New Zealand. So we were fortunate again to be relocated back with my husband's company back here. Settled in for a while, COVID came, and then in 2021 we had the opportunity to go back to Europe. So we went to Sweden. My husband was offered a role with Volvo Cars up there in Gothenburg, and that was a slightly different experience because obviously it was during COVID, and we were kind of given air freight options to go, so we had to think carefully about what to take. We stayed up there for 2 years and decided to come home because, missing family, COVID, MIQ, etc. And I was offered a role back here, so it seemed like a great time to come back. But we did that under our own steam, so that was a slightly different experience again. Yeah.
That's great. And Brendan, do you want to give us a brief rundown of your overseas experience as well?
Yeah, hi everybody. I was also pretty fortunate by the sounds of Hilary's experience. So before getting into real estate, I was a commercial property law with DLA Piper, so a large sort of international law firm. So I was fortunate enough to go to Melbourne and then on to London. During all of those trips, I had sort of a month accommodation, made it a really soft landing. I'm not going to say fortunate, but I was a single man back then. And so now I have 2 children. And when I moved back from Melbourne to Auckland, just engaged at the time and went from a sort of backpack type experience to bringing home a house of furniture and things like that to settle. So I guess like Hilary, the journey slightly changed as I went around the globe and came back home. But I do sort of appreciate the transition and how daunting it can be. So, and I think I actually remember using Crowne. So Kerry, thanks for that. I was someone at your team when we moved back. So unique experience, but enjoyed it. And like many Kiwis overseas, I think at some point you start to feel the pull home with family and friends, and we were no different. So yeah, that's sort of my round trip.
Yeah, fantastic. And that leads really nicely into my next question, where we're talking about sort of preparing to come home. So the question's for you again, Hilary. The first part of that process is the decision to move home. Can you tell us about that process for you and what influenced your decision, and how did you know it was like the right time to move home?
Yeah, well, from China, I mean, we had been away for 8 years. Our daughter did most of her growing up there. I was loving it. I was not ready to come home. I was working for MFAT up at the Consulate General in Shanghai and absolutely loved my role and loved the lifestyle, etc. So, but our daughter, as I said, she was 18. She needed to come back to university. My husband had probably quite enough of, the environment that he was working in, etc. So yeah, as a family, we decided that actually it was probably the right time to come back, and elderly parents, etc., etc. So we came back, we got settled. We always knew that we would come back and spend a couple of years, and then the intention was to get her kind of settled into university, and then we would go off and have another adventure somewhere, preferably Europe. I always say be careful what you wish for, because the Sweden opportunity came along right in the middle of kind of COVID, Alert 3 lockdown. Was a really hard decision to go because the MIQ was in place, but we couldn't pass the opportunity. It was great for my husband in terms of working. He's a consultant. He was this gave him the opportunity to work in-house with Volvo. So we made that decision to go, and it was a good decision, but it was very hard being away, so far away with, limited flights, limited ability to get back in. So that took a toll, I think. We decided that we would give it 2 years. We did 2 years, and then started looking for something to come back to. And I was offered a role, excuse me, back here. And so yeah, we felt that was the right time to come home, and we've been back a year and still kind of settling in. So yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect. And so next question for you, Kerry. Once people make that decision to leave and they're starting to think about what they're going to bring back with them, what are some of their options for bringing those belongings back to New Zealand as they go?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Daz. I guess the first really important thing to consider is, what do you want to bring with you? You've got to put some really good thought into what you need to bring, what's essential. Are you going to bring the whole household, or is it going to be limited to some selected items? I've got children myself, so I know there's always some things that have to come if you've settled and made a life there, like what Brendan had mentioned in his situation. Generally speaking, there's three options. If you are looking at a very small amount, then you might even consider excess baggage. It's not the most expensive option anymore. It gives you a great deal of certainty. If there are those essential items that you really want to arrive straight away and be with you immediately, that's going to be the best way. In saying that, it can be a little bit of a hassle making your way through the airport with those extra items. So as an alternative, you could also look at what's referred to as unaccompanied baggage. That's something you still pack yourself. It's a more cost-effective solution, but you're probably looking at anything from 1 to 4 weeks or longer. And you don't have that same degree of certainty. So you're still going to have to plan quite carefully around what it is you're putting in that shipment and what you take on your person. The third option is, if you are looking at more than just a few boxes, using a professional relocation company. They will come in, they'll do all of the packing for you, you'll have comprehensive insurance in place, and you know, a seamless door-to-door service, but you do need to prepare yourself both practically and emotionally for the fact that that is going to take longer to arrive. And so it's really about thinking through what are those essential items, preparing yourself for being without these things for a long time. So, you know, if you're coming into different seasons, making sure that you've got clothing on your person that's going to be able to accommodate the different weather. You know, if you're looking at bringing activity-based materials, making sure that you're prepared to be without them so you don't have to end up replacing them if that shipment does get delayed or it's not here when you expect it to be. When you make your decision, have a really good look at replacement values in your destination. You could reach out to relocation providers, get some indicative costs, and prepare yourself a bit of a cost assessment. It's a great exercise because you will find there are certain minimums. So inherently, there's going to be things you have to ship, and sometimes there can be a minimum cost associated with that. So understanding exactly what the differential is between a small and a larger shipment versus replacement is a really, really good exercise. And the first step, if you are relocating a full household, is to have relocation companies come out and conduct a survey. A lot of them can do that virtually now through an app, but you know, often preferable to have someone actually come into your home. It's very important to be comfortable with the relocation provider that you choose, and so that's a great way to sit down with them, get a feel for the company's culture, the points of difference, what they can offer you. And so really it's prudent to start that process probably a minimum of 4 to 6 weeks out from when you're looking at shipping. Okay, and so those are the main things really, Des, to consider.
Yeah, fantastic. My next question is for you, Brendan. A big part of the plan to move home is obviously having somewhere to live. So what are the options out there for people to start that property search from abroad?
Yeah, so I think there's two main options to consider. There's either, which I think most people would take, is the renting, so that they can sort of find their feet for a period of time before they make the decision to buy. Obviously, you know, COVID threw up some pretty unique circumstances for people, so there was obviously a bit of a rush or potentially just a requirement to buy in advance of, you know, sight unseen, so to speak. Obviously the advance of technology with virtual tours and videos and the use of family and friends can help to sort of be your feet on the ground. But I think as far as most commonly what I deal with on a day-to-day with helping people coming back from overseas, either expats or people from other countries, is the more time you can give someone like ourselves notice of you coming, the better off you'll be, as far as we're able to send, with our systems in place, properties far in advance of when they're actually visible on Trade Me. So, Kerry saying 4 to 6 weeks, I probably recommend getting in touch with people like us 4 to 6 months, even in advance. I'm helping people that are just arriving over the next couple of weeks, one from Sydney and one from the UK, who I've been dealing with for an excess of that period of time. And it just allows you to narrow down your sort of search, what you're looking for. Obviously, a lot of people might be having, kids, school zones, where are the family now relocated. And, one of the guys I'm dealing with coming back from Sydney hasn't lived in New Zealand for decades. So yes, he might have visited, and he's got one daughter who's down at university in Otago and another son who needs to go to school, and so there's a lot to sort of take in and balance. And most people coming back from overseas don't have a huge excessive time, so having someone that can hopefully take a bit of the heavy lifting off you when you're coming home, I think, is a massive help. So, probably 12 months is a bit far for us to start thinking about it, but certainly 4 to 6 months, I would start to reach out, because I think you can get put on, we've got tenant database lists, and we've got sort of landlords that are coming up, so we can be matching and doing things in the background well before, because similar, when people are leaving New Zealand, they often get in touch with us quite early as well to start their planning, probably a little bit before they get in touch with Kerry again, because they're sort of thinking about, renting their homes, minimizing mortgage repayments, all that sort of stuff. So I think that's probably a fairly good time frame to reach out.
Yeah, fantastic. That's really good advice. Now, thinking about that actual packing up and leaving, Hilary, when you were packing to move home, how did you decide what you would bring and what you would leave behind?
Yeah, well, coming back from China, we knew that we wanted to probably bring everything. It was a full house container, a full container full of kind of a 4-bedroom house. But actually, it's interesting hearing Kerry talk, because it reminded me that when we went through the exercise, what we did, because we had to, kind of work out the insurance, is we did carefully consider the replacement value around, well, is it worth shipping, carbon miles, blah, blah, blah. Is it worth putting this in the container, shipping it back? Or do we just actually, replace stuff when we get back to New Zealand? And coming from China, it was a fairly easy assessment, because, everything was much more kind of accessible and cheaper, and we had the container, it was paid for. So it was like, okay, let's fill it up. But yeah, once we got back to New Zealand, we found that we had so much stuff that actually 2/3 of it stayed in storage, and it actually stayed in storage until we just recently got back from Sweden. So it does, now I'm kind of like, oh, did we actually need all that stuff? However, going to Sweden, we did air freight only, so it was a very limited capacity, so really what we did was we took stuff that I knew would make us feel at home. So treasured art, a few little treasured little items from our daughter, things like that. And of course, Sweden is the home of IKEA, so hey. So yeah, it was really just the stuff to make us feel like home. And quickly, I noticed there's a question around tax in the Q&A, and I thought I'd quickly just talk about our tax experience going up to Sweden. China was not an issue, but going into Sweden, we had a full tax consult before we went. Sweden has quite a hefty tax regime and capital gains on properties held worldwide. So we were really, really careful. We didn't want to get anything kind of muddled or mixed. So for the person asking that question, my recommendation would be to get a full tax consult with someone in country, with preferably, we went with one of the big four. It was provided by Volvo. So if you're able to do that, do that.
Great. Thank you for jumping in. That's great to be able to answer that question, because I'm sure there will be a lot of those sorts of questions from others as well. Coming back to the packing topic though, Kerry, next one for you. What are some of the things that people need to be aware of when they're packing up their items to bring home?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you've decided to bring your full household, then it's really, you're going back to considering those key points. What do I need as a priority? Are there things that I should be taking on my person? Are there, if goods are going into storage, are there items that I want to isolate to be able to recover from storage quicker? So making sure that that any of those priority items are clearly identified. When you're preparing items to leave, you've got to make sure that everything is really clean. And so if you do have any outdoor furniture or barbecues or sporting equipment, shoes, make sure that you've cleaned them. There's no need to go out and pay someone to fumigate them, because naturally, if it's something that is a risk item, then it may be fumigated in New Zealand anyway. And so you're potentially paying for that twice. But just making sure they're clean with nice hot soapy water, no evidence of spider webs or dirt or anything on them. Making sure that you are aware when you are going through items of what the customs and MPI or agricultural requirements are for New Zealand. So some of those things you might not think about. As you go through a customs form, you're going to be asked to declare whether you have any wooden furniture. Well, of course, most of us have some wooden furniture. And so that's okay, as long as anything made of wood has been purchased from a shop and it's normal treated furniture, it's absolutely fine. You just need to declare it, and it may or may not be inspected. Things like food, however, probably try and avoid that if you can. There are certain items that are more problematic than others. Don't bring honey products or meat products or seafood or similar. However, generally speaking, food, as long as it is shop bought and sealed, will be fine. But it is a case of bearing in mind that those types of items will be inspected by MPI, and that can create a delay for your shipment. It can also mean additional handling, which inherently increases the risk of damage. The more that things are handled, the more that risk increases. The other thing to be aware of is customs charges. So if you are going out and buying anything new, thinking, oh, cool, I'm going to capitalize on the fact that things are a lot cheaper to replace in my current country of origin, bear in mind that if you declare them as new and unused, you will be charged duty on those items. So it is a case of assessing whether or not it's worthwhile. The other thing generally is just making sure that the house is ready for the packers. So your packing team are going to come in, they're going to pack everything, make sure that the dishes are clean and the dishwasher's empty and the fridge is defrosted. You don't want anything that might create mold going on in that shipment. And naturally they'll come in and pack everything. So there's really little else that you need to do. Take pictures off the walls. When it comes to professionals packing, definitely the best option for an international shipment. You cannot get full insurance cover if you pack yourself. You will get very, very limited cover if you pack yourself. The professionals know what they're doing. It's a really risky scenario, so it is best to leave it with them. They're going to use also materials that we know are appropriate from an MPI perspective and won't cause you any issues later on. And it will also decrease the risk of those items being inspected. So anything marked as packed by owner will inherently be inspected by those authorities when it arrives. So definitely leave things to the professionals if you can for those larger shipments.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Kerry. Brendan, my next question is for you, and this is about actually arriving back into the country. If someone has arrived home and they're either waiting for settlement on their new home or they're just waiting until they get back into New Zealand before they start their property search, what are some of the options they have to help bridge the gap between arriving and settling into a more permanent home?
Yeah, so I guess there are a number of options depending on probably budgets and who you're traveling with. I know, again, if you've got young children, God, Hilary talking about MIQ is starting to make me shake with my two little ones coming back from Australia. But that obviously presents more challenges depending on who you're traveling with and how many people. But so other than obviously hotels and things like that, Airbnbs, they're pretty accustomed to extending out a bit longer, and there can be some flexibility there. But we and look, lots of companies around New Zealand now deal with fully furnished accommodation, in the sense that people have done the reverse. They've gone on overseas on secondments for work, and as opposed to doing what Hilary did and potentially pack up the home, they leave the furniture in place, and they have someone like us come along and try and find people for those to sort of fit in the gaps. And I think while it's probably not thought about too often, potentially actually going on Trade Me and looking at what are fully furnished options, even though it might be a few 2 or 3 months, depending on when you're actually coming back to New Zealand or landing. If it's in the middle of winter, for example, that can be a really challenging time for properties to be rented. So even if you see a property is available long term, in those winter months, if you ring up the agent and offer them 3 or 6 months in that period, that may actually help them fill a gap where a period's a little bit quiet. So I wouldn't actually shy away from reaching out to some of those people as well. If you start getting, or you make a bit more of a last minute decision to come home, not everyone plans 6 months in advance. So if you haven't sort of had a chance to reach out to people like us, that could be another source where it may be substantially cheaper than trying to hire an Airbnb for 3 or 4 months, which obviously with their daily rates can balloon the costs significantly. So that's probably an extra one that I would look at, which people may think isn't going to work shorter term.
Yeah, great. Kerry, a similar question to you. What do people need to be aware of in regards to their shipment arriving when they are first arriving into New Zealand?
Yeah, sure. This is a really important one, and I spoke earlier about that emotional and practical preparation when it comes to delays with your furniture actually getting here, and I really can't stress that enough. From the emotional perspective, just making sure that you have those items that are emotive, so those children's special things that you need, anything else, bring them on your person if you can. But in terms of practical preparation, one thing that a lot of our clients will do to just help them get into their home as quickly as possible, settle in, get the children into the right school zones, do the things that they need to do, is find that long-term rental and actually get rental furniture. It's a lot more cost effective than, as Brendan mentioned, going through an Airbnb, and it avoids that notion of having to move 2 or 3 times potentially. So what happens is, if you get those inherent delays in shipping, if you've got rental furniture, it becomes less of an issue. It's dialed down. You're not having to go through to your Airbnb host and extend things. You're not having to budget for that extra cost, which is completely unexpected. So it just helps to really practically mitigate all of that inconvenience that can arrive from those shipping delays. No shipping company is immune, and relocation providers really have no control over that. So it is just a case of finding one that's going to be really communicative, making sure that they've got a great customer service team who's going to keep you informed and try and minimize those disruptions as they arrive. Once your goods do arrive, bear in mind that they will also go through the customs clearance process. Now, that is in the hands really of the authorities, and obviously the MPI clearances as well. Those will usually take 1 to 2 weeks. But it does often mean that sometimes there's a short turnaround if you're wanting things as quickly as possible between those being cleared and your relocation company saying, hey, we're ready for delivery, let's get you locked in. And so just bear that in mind with your planning. Often weekends can be a little bit difficult to lock in there as well. So just trying when you can to have that little bit of flexibility, or making sure that you're working with a provider who can work with you around your preferred timing as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Next question for you, Hilary. Coming and arriving and settling back into New Zealand, how did you go about making new friends and business connections and re-establishing yourself in the country?
Mm. I guess like as expats, you learn to make friends quickly, and your relationships tend to intensify much more quickly, and make potentially unnaturally, I guess, because you are searching for those connections when you are offshore. So coming back, I found myself much more adaptive and obviously resilient, particularly from China and also from Sweden, given the COVID stuff. But I guess what I learned the most from China was that your networks are super important. So professional networks and also your personal networks. So I made sure that I kept those active. I was really active while we were away. I found coming back that we found quite early on actually in our expat journey that people forget that you're there. So because they're so used to you being away, they forget that you're back. So actually, the effort needs to come from you in terms of keeping in contact, setting up opportunities to get together, finding ways to connect with people. Making the effort, I guess. The other thing that we did with our daughter was making sure that because she was little when we left, she was 10, we made sure that she kept her friendships alive. So over the years, so that when she came back, she had a community too, that she was kind of able to slot back into herself as a teenager. So, yeah, but we've found actually a lot of our close friends coming back now are other returned expats, particularly from China. We all kind of came back at the same time, and those shared experiences. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Kerry, wonder if you can maybe share with us any sort of common pitfalls or surprises that clients often find as they are relocating back home.
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to relocation, I think the biggest point here is completing your due diligence with the company that you're going to be working with. There are a number of hidden costs and idiosyncrasies wrapped around a shipping quote that you may not be aware of. And so working usually with a professional who can help you kind of dissect that and make sure that you are actually comparing like with like when you're assessing companies is really important. Understanding as well who they're going to be working with at destination. So what company are they going to be using in New Zealand? Are they going to broker to the cheapest provider and then you're not getting consistent levels of service and what you think you're paid for? Or do they have vetted suppliers that they're working with who are local companies? And just really making sure that you're completing that due diligence, because there are some serious consequential costs that can arise if you don't. And so, yeah, work with your relocation company, get a really thorough understanding of what you're looking for, and make sure that you really are comparing like with like to avoid those types of unwanted surprises.
And the question for you, Brendan, the property market in general, I think those probably watching from the outside have seen there's been some twists and turns over the last few years. How are things looking at the moment, and what do you think we might see in the next sort of 12 months or so?
Twists and turns. Yeah, that's a good word for it. No, I think it's pretty well documented and everyone knows that everyone's a backyard real estate agent, in New Zealand and probably around the world. And it's been an extremely challenging last year, particularly. I've spoken to some pretty experienced agents across the country, and one of them referenced it was tougher than a GFC for New Zealand real estate and the agents. I'm quite a visual person, so last year basically interest rates were going like this, and house prices were going like this, and so it made it really challenging for vendors and buyers, because obviously buyers didn't want to jump in, buy something, and then a month later it was of less value, and obviously the interest rates were going up, and unless you were really highly motivated, or you'd bought a property a long time ago, and whether you made another $100,000 or $50,000 didn't matter because you were fishing up north, then it was just really tough. But life keeps moving, and people keep having babies, and people get too big for spaces, and people start coming back, and there's a little bit of normality returning to the market. It feels like we've had sort of 4 false starts to start creeping back in the right direction, and the underlying data is that it is slowly, improving. But as recent as less than a few weeks ago in the OCR, there was a particular analyst with ANZ that said it might go up. That was enough to put a speed wobble through the whole market. But at a particular level, of course, it didn't change, and now we've just sort of got to rest everyone back into the mode because buyers just sort of disappeared. So, it is really challenging. There's lots of different parts of the market, media, and what the government are doing. There's new legislation that is improving things if you are a landlord, as far as interest deductibility goes. There's obviously a big influx of immigration at present, and there's a reduction of consents around buildings, but there's a huge oversupply. So there's all these different pieces that are sort of fighting against each other, and it's a little bit, I think, very confusing for both sides of the fence. Is it the right time to try and sell? Is it the right time to buy? So I think there's still a long way to go for it to sort of even out. And I think a lot of people, in my mind, confused. It wasn't a property boom after COVID. It was a credit boom. So again, if you visually think you could go to the bank, as a young person buying a home, get $1 million at 2%. You go to the auction on Saturday, you can put your hand up to $1 million. Now, if you go to the same bank, you get a loan of 800, you pay 5 to 7%. You go to the same property, I can only put my hand up to 800. There's nothing happened to that property. It was just purely around the funding and how you can service that debt. And I personally are dealing, because we have a large investment business, that people are really coming under the pump that have unfortunately committed to themselves, and now all of a sudden, a lady this last night her mortgage has gone from 2.5 to 7.5, I think it was, on an investment property. That's a huge jump, and it's just not sustainable. So I think there are going to be, unfortunately, some people that have to take losses to sort of move on and accept that it just wasn't, unfortunately, the right investment for them. But in order to kind of take the noose off the neck, so to speak, they're going to have to make some tough decisions. But of course, that means there's opportunities for people that are coming back into the market from overseas. When people are sort of needing to sell, then there can certainly be some good opportunities to pick up for those that are returning back to New Zealand. So I think it's a bit of an interesting market, and I could go on and on about this, as you can probably tell, but I think that's hopefully a little bit of a snippet of what's been happening in the market.
Yeah, thank you, Brendan. And just a reminder to everyone listening, we're getting towards the end of our questions now. So if you do have questions that have popped up in your own mind, please do pop them into the Q&A, because we'll get to those in just a couple of minutes. But before we do that, I have just another question for Hilary again. Hilary, what were some of the surprises for you coming back to New Zealand, and what were something that you maybe wish you had known before you left, that you would like to share with everyone now?
After the 8 years in China, coming back to New Zealand was, I really hate using this term, but it was a bit of a reverse culture shock. So it was adapting to a new, change in pace and style. Just so many things. It took us all a good 12 months to really settle back in and feel like we were kind of home. But yeah, life changes, you know, yeah, especially when you've been away for such a long time. So I guess the one thing for us was, I mean, we came back and there were new suburbs in Auckland, you know. So we made no decisions quickly. We took our time. We thought really, really hard about where we wanted to live, how that was going to suit. You know, when we left, we had a child at school. When we came back, we had a university student. So, you know, where did we want to live? How did we want to live after living in away China and Sweden? Public transport's amazing. You don't necessarily need to rely on a car 24/7. So, you know, that kind of changed the way we thought about getting around. So, yeah, I think the key thing though for me was the unexpected stuff. So things like before you leave your jurisdiction, so, you know, China, Sweden, etc., making sure that you have all your kind of life admin in order. So your police checks, for example, your health records, superannuation, that type of thing. It's really important to make sure that you have that all lined up. So for China, for example, before, you know, you can't do it, to do any of that stuff offshore is really, really hard to get a police check. You know, and you think, well, I'm not, how am I going to need a police check? Well, you know, you might want to apply for a role that needs a security clearance. You can't get that without a police check. Or you might be applying for a visa for a partner from overseas, for example, like my daughter is. They both needed to get police checks. You don't think about that type of thing. So making sure that you have all your ducks in a row around all of that important stuff, thinking ahead, thinking about the future, thinking about what is it that you might need. Yeah.
Yeah, great. We have had a couple of questions come in and we're going to get to them first, but actually, Hilary, I'd like you to maybe just expand a little bit, it's a question from me, a little bit on how you feel your lifestyle has changed, how that being overseas, coming back into New Zealand, what are some of the things that you do think of differently now?
Hugely. I mean, our perspective on life is completely different because and I was talking about it yesterday actually to someone, like China, Sweden, like they're so, China, Sweden, New Zealand, completely different. Like you've got extreme ends of kind of everything, consumerism, political, you know, political systems, da 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 da. So coming back to New Zealand, we have a much better appreciation for just how lucky and privileged we are to be able to come back to a country like New Zealand. That's our fallback option. But yeah, so the natural environment that we have, I don't know. It's sorry, I'm kind of put on the spot, but it's a hard thing to verbalize. But yeah, I think the other thing is like for a long time you kind of think, oh, you know, I have to have this and I have to have that and I have to have all these things to make me happy. But actually, kind of, I think like really it's just about where you and your family are. You know, like if you're all together, then that's really all that matters. It doesn't, the stuff around you is just stuff. Does that make sense? Yeah. But yeah, you know, the natural environment that we live in is amazing. We're lucky. I mean, our public transport, yes, it needs work, but by and large, you know, it's easy to kind of get around. We have lots of other issues, but yeah, I think overall we are very, very lucky and privileged to have this country to come back as our fallback option. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question. Sorry, Daz.
Yeah, no, it does. Thank you. No, it's a really good thing to think about. Looking at a couple of questions we've had come in, I'm just going to summarize this one slightly, but to you, Brendan, I think it's about trends around how properties are bought. I know, you know, auctions were sort of very popular for a long time. Are we sort of moving away from that, or what's the sort of predominant method that properties are sort of being bought and sold at the moment?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the time the method of sale is really determined, well, there's a few factors, is predominantly by the market. Obviously, if it's running red hot and you've got, 20, 30, 40 people at each open home, and you know that there's going to be lots of registered bidders, and you're going to kind of let the natural market do its thing, and that's going to decide the highest price for the vendor, right? That really shifts away from that when, as you can imagine, like last year, no one was running auctions because no one was going to open to viewings, no one was turning up to them, so it would have just been a waste of money, and I guess a little bit of a fruitless exercise, because what you're trying to achieve by an auction is, an unconditional sale, 10% deposit next business day and a settlement in 30 days. So like from a vendor's perspective, typically that is sort of like the holy trinity, right? And this gentleman referred to sort of price by negotiation, and some people just don't like options, and I think some people fail to realize that there is an option of putting in, if they are the mode of the day, then you can put in a pre-auction offer. Now obviously if you put in a pre-auction offer, a vendor doesn't have to accept that, they can continue with the process. And similarly, if you've got, conditional on finance or selling a property, then it probably doesn't really make sense to cancel the auction for that type of an arrangement, because it can fall over. But if this gentleman says he might return after 45 years, if he comes back and there's a property for sale by auction, and he's a cash unconditional buyer, he can settle in a week, and can actually put forward a more desirable. He might have a huge deposit, so he can put down 15 or 20%, for example. There is a way of sort of going around the system to hopefully use it to your advantage. Obviously, it's always going to depend on the agent that you're working with, the vendor's preference, what the market is like. But at the moment, and he refers in his question to where that you get all the offers in on one day and you sit down and go through them. That's what you call a set date of sale. And so each of those buyers can put forward conditions that suit them. So for example, they can make a conditional, they could ask for a longer settlement because maybe they haven't sold their property. So you can then end up working individually with designated buyers. What they call a multi-offer process is what this gentleman's talking about. And at that point, you can sort of decide, well, actually, this is a cleaner contract. This has got a higher price. So you don't have to necessarily go with the highest price. You might really like that couple over there who're going to start a family, and you're an older couple and you don't want it to get developed and bulldozed. So that does offer you some flexibility about who the ultimate buyer is as well. But these are all the questions that I ask when I speak to a vendor when I'm trying to win that business, or when I'm trying to help those people, is, okay, what are you trying to achieve? Is it the best price? Is it a long settlement because you've got lots of things happening in your life that mean you don't want to be out in a month? And then you kind of reverse engineer, hopefully, the best solution for them, and then work in with the market to hopefully, our job is to sort of hopefully make both sides at least happy that they've got a good deal, as far as I haven't massively overpaid and I haven't taken a bath. And there's always a balance between that, particularly at the moment with the market. And as I said before, there's some tough decisions that are going to be made. But again, getting some sound advice, this gentleman here, I'd just like to add one more piece, because with my commercial property background, something that was very common, certainly in Australia and the US and lots of parts of the world, is that there's a buyer's agent. Now, I think it really doesn't make a lot of sense in New Zealand that, I guess, a layperson, for want of a better word, is negotiating with a professional to purchase property, which are, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, and just expect that you should do it on your own. So I've actually started a buyer's agency, part of our business, given my background, to actually represent the buyer. So what that means is you would pay the buyer's agent a fee. I would represent your best interests, because don't forget, we are paid typically by the vendor. Therefore, while we're trying to put deals together, obviously, we still have, we've got the vendor's hat on. So that's just a new service that I've personally started. I'm working with some of those expats I mentioned before, who are very time poor. They've got very large business acquisitions happening as part of the transition. So while the family home is incredibly important, when you actually start to draw the list of priorities, it's actually a little bit further down the list. So by able to employ someone like myself, who's not actually working specifically for the vendor, but for them, that's probably a little step further than a virtual tour or a video to actually have someone working on your team. So that's just an extra piece that is pretty uncommon in New Zealand, but something I've started to do since I got home.
Yeah, well, that's great. Thank you.
Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, no, thank you. Question for you, Kerry. Do you have a view on shipping vehicles back to New Zealand? Is that often a viable option? Is it worth doing it, for example, if there's space in a container to fill?
Yeah, absolutely. It can be, but it's something that it's really important to complete some pretty serious due diligence around. With New Zealand, there's no real arduous process in terms of import approvals. You just really need to check in with the AA in advance to make sure that your vehicle will be road compliant, or any steps that you might need to take in order to do so. The biggest thing really is summing up that cost assessment again. So looking at what you could sell the vehicle for in your country of origin, looking at replacement costs. Secondhand vehicles are pretty readily available in New Zealand. The market's really slow at the moment, so you could pick up a very, very good deal right now. And then adding to that the shipping costs, the on-road costs, which will be your compliance, potentially fumigation, which could be upwards of $1,000. Getting it warranted, vehicle licensing, towing to compliance centre, all of those sorts of things add up. And so it is a really good one to sit down with your relocation company and understand, what the cost might be for insurance and shipping, and then add to that some of those other related costs, and just assess what your resale would be at origin versus purchasing here. There's a couple of options when it comes to shipping. You can place that vehicle in the container with your household goods, or you can look at what's referred to as a roll-on, roll-off option, which is naturally usually more cost-effective. The vehicle is literally driven on to the ship and driven back off. It may increase risk of damage, but as I say, tends to be a little bit more cost-effective. So just taking some time to work through those costs and things is a good exercise in that regard. It may or may not be worth it.
No, thank you. And we do have one more question here, is a little bit more specific, so do say if you can. It's just around the sort of current status of shipping. I'm going to generalize this question a little bit more. What is the sort of general state of shipping at the moment? We know there has been some delays, sort of advertised. How are things looking at the moment?
Things have largely improved. So since that real state of volatility, during and post-COVID, things have improved, but then we've had a few disasters which have sort of meant that shipping routes have had to be, or ships have had to be rerouted, and that does create volatility. There's still less shippers coming into New Zealand and less routes. So when you're talking about shipping from Canada or the States, there's just less shipping options coming here, and that means if vessels are rolled or containers are rolled to another vessel, it can create delays. It's difficult to get bookings, which can create delays, and all of those things can drive up costs. When you've got a bit of a monopoly, the freight costs can inherently increase. And so, yeah, it's good to talk to your relocation company. They're always going to have a few different shipping options that they can look at. The old rule of thumb will apply. The cheapest is probably usually going to be the slowest, but not always. So have a good chat to them and make sure that you're just being practical when you are assessing transit times. If somebody tells you that, the shipping is going to take 6 weeks, maybe double it. to account for delays, to account for actually getting a booking on the vessel, to account for customs clearance and things at the other end, if not more. So you should be able to get some really good advice from that. Speak to a professional, maybe get a gauge when you're undertaking those household goods surveys, what each company says, and don't necessarily take it at face value. Make sure you're benchmarking it by talking to potentially other companies as well, to get a good feel for what the reality will be. But yeah, it has largely improved. As I said, there's just been a few bumps in the road, and we are seeing a lot of vessels rerouted at the moment, which has caused some pretty significant delays, unfortunately.
I would like to say a big thank you to Brendan, to Kerry, and to Hilary for joining us today, for sharing their expertise.